I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I wish I wasn't always this alone. The words floated over the fence on a cool Friday night in early November. I was standing in my small backyard in Denver, wrapping up the hose after watering the last stubborn tomato plant that refused to die, when her voice stopped me. It wasn't dramatic or loud, just quiet and honest in a way people usually save for themselves. Through a thin gap in the old wooden fence, I could see part of her back patio. Soft yellow light poured out from her kitchen door. A small candle flickered on the table. My neighbor sat there in an oversized sweater, with a blanket around her legs and a glass of wine in her hand, staring at her phone like she was waiting for a message that never came. I'd seen her before, of course. Haley in 2B. That's how I thought of her, even though these were townhouses, not apartments. She'd moved in about 6 months ago. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. We'd exchanged a few polite waves in the parking area, argued once about trash pickup times in a calm, respectful way, and that was about it. She worked weird hours. I worked from home. Our lives ran next to each other but never really touched. Tonight, the world on the other side of our fence felt closer. 3 houses down, the Morales family was throwing a birthday party. Laughter carried over the yards. Kids shouted. Someone sang along badly to an old song. The smell of grilled meat drifted on the cold air. Their string lights glowed warm and bright, making everything look like a movie. In contrast, Haley sat alone with her candle and her wine, watching shadows move on the fence like she had front-row seats to a life that did not include her. I could have gone back inside. I could have pretended I hadn't heard anything. That would have been the normal thing to do. We were basically strangers who shared a property line and a mailman. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. Instead, I stood there with my hand on the back door handle and listened to my own heartbeat. An hour earlier, my phone had lit up with my best friend Tyler's name. He had called from Chicago to show me his newborn son on video. I watched him hold that tiny baby like he'd been waiting his whole life for that moment. We talked about old times, stupid things we did in college, how weird it felt that one of us was now somebody's dad. When the call ended, I felt a strange mix of happiness and emptiness. I was genuinely glad for him. At the same time, my house felt even quieter than usual. The only sound was the heater kicking on and the refrigerator humming. That was when I stepped outside for air and heard Haley's voice. I wish I wasn't always this alone. Something about the way she said always hit me, like this wasn't a bad night, this was her normal. Before I could talk myself out of it, I walked toward the section of fence where the boards were a little bit warped, and you could just see through the cracks. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. "Hey," I said, not too loud. "Nice night." She jumped a little and turned her head. For the first time, I saw more than just a blur. In the candlelight, her face looked softer than I expected. Dark hair pulled into a loose bun. Tired eyes. Pretty, but more than that. Real. "Oh," she said, straightening. "Hi. Sorry. I didn't know anyone was out there." "Didn't mean to scare you," I said. "I'm Michael. From next door. We argued about trash day that one time." Her mouth twitched into a small smile. "The great Tuesday versus Wednesday battle. I remember. I'm Haley." "Glad we survived it," I said. She let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. For a few seconds, the only sounds were the party music drifting over and the soft clink of her wine glass against the table. "Rough week?" I asked gently. She hesitated like she was deciding how honest to be with the guy behind the fence. "You could say that," she answered finally. "Work has been chaos. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. My family group chat is nothing but my cousins, engagement photos, and now the Morales clan is out here having the happiest night of their lives under fairy lights while I drink wine alone and talk to myself." She shook her head. "You weren't supposed to hear that part, by the way." "Sorry," I said. "The fence is old. It leaks sound." "It's okay," she said. "Maybe I needed someone to hear it." I leaned my shoulder against the fence, keeping a respectful distance but not going away. "For what it's worth," I said, "you're not the only one who feels like the whole world is paired up except them." She turned toward the fence a little more. "You live here alone?" Yeah, I said. Moved here a year and a half ago. I build websites from home. My social life is mostly my computer and the guy at the sandwich shop who knows my order by heart. No girlfriend? Partner? Secret spouse hiding inside? She asked. Nope, I said. Had a serious relationship. Ended 2 years ago. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. She wanted city lights and constant travel. I wanted a small yard and enough quiet to hear myself think. Guess who won? I'm going to guess not you, Haley said quietly. Depends how you look at it, I said. On paper, I lost. In reality, I stopped pretending I was someone else. She went quiet for a moment, running her thumb around the rim of her glass. I was engaged once, she said suddenly, like the word surprised even her. Ben. We picked out a venue and everything. 6 weeks before the wedding, he told me he wasn't sure he could marry someone who cared more about deadlines than date nights. He said he felt like I was always halfway out the door. Wow, I said softly. Did he say what he cared more about? He said he wanted someone who made him feel like he was enough. Her voice tightened, which was funny, because that's exactly how he made me feel. Not enough. Not fun enough. Not soft enough. Not whatever enough. From the party, somebody shouted for another round of toasts. Glasses clinked. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. A cheer went up. Haley stared toward the sound, then turned away. That was 3 years ago, she continued. Since then, I have become very good at building a life that looks fine from the outside. I show up to work. I pay my bills. I smile at the right times, but right now, sitting here listening to them celebrate, I just feel tired. Tired of pretending it doesn't bother me. Yeah, I said. I get that. Do you? She asked quietly. I spent most of last year traveling for work, I said. Airports, hotel rooms, video calls. People saw my photos in different cities and thought I was living some dream. In reality, I ate takeout alone on beds that weren't mine and talked to my plants when I got home because they were the only living things waiting for me. She was silent for a second. Then she laughed softly. You talk to your plants? She asked. Only the ones that are struggling, I said. Seems unfair to ignore them when they need encouragement. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. That might be the saddest and sweetest thing I've heard all week, she said. I'll take that as a compliment, I replied. She shifted in her chair, and I heard the creak of wood. I should probably go inside, she said. I've already said more to you than I've said to any neighbor in months. One more thing, I said before she could stand. For whatever it's worth, I don't think you're meant to sit alone on a patio listening to other people be happy. She sucked in a small breath. That's a nice thought, she said, but you don't really know me. Not yet, I said, but I'd like to change that. Maybe we could start with coffee tomorrow morning. Over the fence, neutral ground. She was quiet for so long I thought I pushed too far. Then she said, You're serious? Yeah, I said. I'll be out here by 8. If you are too, great. If not, I'll just assume you value sleep more than awkward neighbor coffee, and I won't bother you. A small laugh escaped her. This time it sounded a little less tired. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. 8, she said. I can do 8. I'm usually awake by then, worrying about work anyway. Perfect, I said. I make decent coffee. I can pour yours into a travel mug and hand it over the fence like a shady caffeine deal. Now I kind of want to see that, she said. We said goodnight and went back inside. My house felt a little less empty than it had an hour before. The next morning, I was in my backyard before my alarm finished ringing. The air was cold, but the sky was clear and bright. I poured 2 mugs of coffee and waited by the fence, feeling more nervous than I wanted to admit. At 8:06, I heard her back door open. Footsteps on the patio. My heart bumped against my ribs. Morning, Haley called softly. Morning, I said. 1 contraband coffee coming up. I lifted the mug over the fence until her hand closed around it. Her fingers brushed mine, warm even in the chilly air. This feels weird, she said, but good weird. Before I could answer, a car door slammed in the driveway out front. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. A man's voice called her name. Deep, familiar. Too confident. Haley froze. "That's my ex," she whispered. "I wasn't expecting him to show up here." She set the mug down with shaking hands and stepped away from the fence toward the gate. I stood there on my side, holding my own coffee, listening to footsteps and muffled voices, and realized this quiet neighbor I was just starting to know might be standing at a crossroads I did not understand yet. And ready or not, I was already involved. I could hear his voice clearly, even from my side of the fence. "Haley, you were going to ignore my messages forever?" His tone sounded casual, but tight underneath. The kind of voice people use when they think they still have the upper hand. I pretended to fuss with the hose even though the grass did not need water. I did not want to eavesdrop, but there was no way not to hear them. "I told you we were done, Ben," Haley said. Her voice was calm, but I could hear strain in it. "I just want to talk," he said. "I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I drove all the way from Boulder. You can give me 10 minutes. Silence. Then the sound of her gate opening. "Fine," she said. 10 minutes. On the patio. Then I have work." I heard their footsteps on the concrete. The clink of her picking up the mug I'd just handed over. I stared at the fence, coffee cooling in my hand, feeling like I was in some strange play without a script. "That's new," Ben said. "You don't drink your coffee out here." "I do now," she replied. "I like it." Something about the way she said that made me smile in spite of the knot in my stomach. I tried not to listen, but his voice carried. "Look," he said. "I've been thinking. I was harsh, all right? I said things I didn't mean. We were both under stress." "You said you were relieved you found out who I really was before the wedding," Haley said quietly. "Pretty sure you meant that." He scoffed. "I meant I didn't want to marry a version of you who never showed up. You were always at the office, always on your phone." "You know that. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I heard her chair creak. I imagined her sitting up straighter. I showed up for you more than I showed up for myself," she said. "I was planning a wedding, managing a full-time job, and trying to be the person you wanted. It still wasn't enough." "It could be different now," he said quickly. "I got a promotion. I have more flexibility. We could move back closer to your old office. Get the life we talked about." There it was. The offer to rewind everything, like the last 3 years never happened. "I don't want that life anymore," Haley said. He went quiet for a second. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge. "You've been here a few months, and suddenly you're some small neighborhood person who drinks cheap coffee in the backyard and chats with the old lady down the street. This is not you, Haley. You're bigger than this." My chest tightened. I felt heat climb up my neck. "I am not smaller because I decided I want a life that does not chew me up," she said. "I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I am not lesser because I like waking up in my own house and talking to neighbors who know my name." "Neighbors," he said. "Is that what this is about?" His footsteps moved closer to the fence. I stepped back on instinct even though he could not see me. "Is there someone else?" he asked. The pause that followed felt endless. I held my breath without meaning to. "There is someone who is kind to me," Haley said finally. "Who listens without making me feel like a problem, who doesn't treat me like a second job." Ben let out a short, bitter laugh. "So that's a yes," he said. "You replaced me with some guy who probably has time for you because he's not doing anything important." It took everything in me not to march around the fence. "I did not replace you," Haley said, her voice steady now. "You walked away. I built something new in the space you left." Quote, "You're making a mistake," he snapped. "Call me when you realize that." His chair scraped back. Footsteps. The gate opening and slamming. A car door. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. Engine starting. Then he was gone. The silence that followed felt heavy. After a minute, I cleared my throat. "You still out here?" I asked quietly. There was a soft exhale. Then, "Yeah." "Can I say one thing?" I asked. "Sure," she replied. Her voice sounded tired now, but not broken. "I know we barely know each other," I said. "But for the record, choosing a life where you actually breathe does not make you small. It makes you smart." For a few seconds, she did not answer. Then I heard her chair move closer to the fence. "Do you want your mug back?" she asked. I'm on dish duty in my house, I said, so yeah, I should probably rescue it. Come around, she said. The words came out careful, like she was testing them as she spoke. You sure? I asked. Yeah, she said. If we're going to keep doing this coffee thing, it might be easier without the fence between us all the time. I walked through my house, heart pounding a little too fast for a simple walk next door. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. When I stepped into her backyard through the side gate, it was the first time I'd seen it from this side. Her patio was simple, like mine, a small table, 2 mismatched chairs, a potted plant that was either dying or trying very hard not to. The candle from last night was still there, burnt down to a low stump. Haley stood next to the table, arms folded, holding my mug in one hand. Up close, she looked different than she had through the crack in the fence. More human. There were faint dark circles under her eyes, a small freckle near her left eyebrow. Strong lines in her jaw, like she was used to holding herself together. Hey, I said. Hey, she answered, handing me the mug. Sorry you heard all that. You don't have to apologize for someone else's words, I said. He was out of line. She gave a small shrug, like she was still deciding whether she was allowed to accept that. That was Ben, she said. The almost wedding. I figured, I said. Guy had that I am sure I know what is best for you tone. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. A real smile tugged at her mouth. He has a name for that, she said. He calls it leadership. That tracks, I said. She laughed softly then. It sounded better than any of the music still drifting from the Morales party, which was somehow still going. Haley sat down in one chair and gestured to the other. Sit, she said, if you want. I sat. For a moment we just drank our coffee in quiet. The morning felt clearer, like the heavy air from last night had finally moved on. He thinks this life is beneath you, I said carefully. Is it? Quote. Her eyes moved over her small yard, the fence, the neighbor's tree branches reaching overhead. 3 years ago I would have said yes, she admitted. I thought success meant high-rise apartments and constant motion, clothes that need dry cleaning, takeout in boxes that cost too much. And now? I asked. Now I like that my feet can touch the actual ground, she said. I like hearing kids in the street. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I like knowing the name of the old guy who walks his dog past my house every morning. She took a breath. And last night, she added, I liked that when I said something out loud I was ashamed to even think, someone heard me and did not make me feel stupid. My cheeks warmed a little. I focused on my mug. Anytime, I said. We talked until our coffee turned lukewarm. Surface stuff at first. Jobs. Family. The best and worst things about the neighborhood. I learned she was an interior designer who worked mostly remote, flying out only when needed for big projects. She learned I did freelance web development for small businesses. You really wanted out of the busy life, she said, sipping what was left in her mug. Yeah, I said. After my breakup, I respected the fact that she wanted a life I did not, but I also realized I had no idea what I wanted. So I decided to try something simple. A small house, a yard. Saying yes to fewer things, but really showing up for them. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. She looked at me like she was filing that away. Did it work? She asked. Mostly, I said. Sometimes the silence gets loud. But I'd still choose this over being lost in a city I never learned the name of. She nodded slowly, like that made sense. Over the next few weeks, our fence stopped being a border and became a meeting place. On weekday mornings, when I took breaks between calls, I'd hear her back door open and see her watering the plants she claimed she was terrible at keeping alive. On weekends, she would show up with a mug in hand and a question like, if you had to pick one movie to watch forever, what would it be? Or do you think people are happier when they move a lot or stay put? We never scheduled it, but we always seemed to end up out there at the same time. One Saturday, she was kneeling by the fence, tugging at something buried deep in the dirt. She made a frustrated noise. You okay? I asked, bringing my rake to the fence line. "This route is winning," she grumbled. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I was trying to plant something new, but the ground is fighting back. "Do you want help?" I asked. She hesitated for half a heartbeat. Old habit, I guessed. Then she said, "Yeah, if you don't mind." I came around again. Together, we pulled the stubborn root out. Dirt flew. My hand slipped once, and we both ended up laughing when mud hit my shirt. "Sorry," she said, trying to dab at my sleeve with her sleeve. "I'm a professional at making clean things dirty." "You should see me with printer ink," I replied. "It's a crime scene every time." When the root finally came free, Haley fell back on the grass, laughing. "That felt weirdly good," she said, catching her breath, "like ripping out something old that didn't belong." "Metaphor much?" I asked. "Occupational hazard," she said, still smiling. "Design brain. I see symbols in everything." As I watched her, hair messy, dirt on her cheek, lying in her yard like she had just survived battle with the ground itself, something in me shifted. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. She was not the quiet mystery behind the fence anymore. She was here, on the same side, real and flawed and trying her best, just like me. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a moment, sitting up. "Sure," I said. "Why did you actually come to the fence that night?" she asked. "I mean the real reason. You could have pretended you didn't hear me." I thought about lying, saying I was just being polite. But something about Haley made it hard to be anything but honest. "Because I know what it feels like to say something out loud and hope the universe hears you," I said. "And I figured if the universe was busy, I could show up instead." She looked at me for a long time, something soft and surprised in her eyes. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me," she said quietly. The air between us changed, not all at once, but enough that I felt it. We went back to our sides of the fence later, but from that day on, it never felt as tall. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. One evening, near the end of November, I was in my kitchen stirring a pot of soup when there was a light knock on my back door. When I opened it, Haley stood there holding a foil-covered plate. "Peace offering," she said. "I made too much lasagna. Or maybe I just wanted an excuse to come over. Either way, it's for you." I stepped aside to let her in. It was the first time she had been inside my house. She looked around at the books stacked on the coffee table, the worn couch, the single plant trying to survive in the corner. "Your place looks like you," she said. In a good way, warm, a little chaotic, real. "Thanks," I said. "Yours looks like a magazine in the front and like a person actually lives there in the back." She laughed. "That's the highest praise you can give a designer." We ate soup and lasagna at my small table, knees almost touching. Talked about nothing important and everything at the same time. When she left that night, my house stayed warm long after the oven cooled. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. Somewhere between that first fence conversation and shared lasagna, something new grew in the space between us. It was not just friendship, not yet love, but it was something alive, something worth protecting. I just didn't know yet how much it would be tested. December came with the first real snow. I woke up one Saturday to find the whole neighborhood covered in white. Roofs, fences, cars, everything looked softer. I made coffee, pulled on a hoodie, and stepped out into the cold. My breath came out in little clouds. Haley was already outside. She stood in her yard in boots and a long coat, spinning slowly in the falling snow like a kid who forgot to be self-conscious. When she saw me, she grinned. "You're up," she said. "I was going to text you a picture." "Live version is better," I said. "You look happy." "I love the first snow," she said. "Where I grew up in Texas, it was a big event if we got flurries. This feels like magic." I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. She bent down and scooped up a handful of snow, packing it into a lopsided ball. She eyed the fence between us. "Don't you dare," I warned. She threw it. It hit my shoulder and exploded into wet pieces. "You started it," she said, laughing. "In what universe?" I asked. But I was laughing too. I made a snowball and lobbed it gently over the fence. It caught her coat instead of her face. She gasped dramatically. "How dare you attack a lady in her own yard?" she said. We ended up in a slow, clumsy snowball fight, both of us trying not to throw too hard. By the time we called a truce, our gloves were soaked and our noses were red. "My hands are frozen," she said. "Coffee?" "Always," I answered. This time, she didn't wait by the fence. She came to my side door like it was the most natural thing in the world. Inside, I handed her a towel for her hair and set a mug of coffee in front of her at my kitchen table. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. She sat there in my hoodie. I'd loaned her over her clothes while her coat dried on the chair back, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. "Have you heard about the neighborhood holiday party?" she asked between sips. "You mean the Morales event of the year?" I said. "Yeah, Mrs. Morales invited me yesterday. Said attendance is mandatory if I want tamales." Haley smiled. She cornered me at the mailbox, said the same thing. I told her I'm terrible at small talk. She told me to bring an appetite and a smile. That's it. "That sounds like her," I said. "Are you going?" "I want to," she said. "But there's this voice in my head that says I'll just end up standing in a corner watching everyone else who actually belongs here." "You're part of this street," I said. "You belong as much as anyone." She looked down at her mug, then up at me. "Will you be there?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "If you want, we can show up at the same time. Less weird that way." Her shoulders relaxed a little. "I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face." "I'd like that," she said. The party was the following Saturday night. The Morales house glowed like something from a movie. Lights around the windows. A giant inflatable snowman next to the porch. Music and laughter spilling out into the cold air. I walked up their driveway and found Haley standing near the sidewalk, hands buried in the pockets of her dark green coat. Her breath came out in little clouds. She looked nervous. "Hey," I said, "you made it." "I almost didn't," she said. "Turned around twice already." "Glad you turned back a third time," I said. "Ready?" "No," she said, honestly, "but I'm here." "That counts," I said. "Come on, I hear tamales are waiting." Inside, the house was full of people. Kids ran through the hall. Someone's uncle told a loud joke. Christmas music played softly under all the talking. The smell of food filled every corner. Mrs. Morales spotted us right away. "There they are," she said, sweeping us into a hug with one arm each. "My quiet neighbors." I heard my neighbors say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. Finally out of their caves. "This is very kind," Haley said, already blushing a little. "Nonsense," Mrs. Morales said. "This street is family. You two are part of it now." She said it so simply that I saw something flicker in Haley's eyes. She swallowed hard and nodded. People came and went around us. Mr. Rodriguez proudly told us about his new fishing rod. The kids asked if we'd seen the snowman out back. Haley listened and asked questions, her shoulders slowly dropping from around her ears. At one point, I looked over and saw her in the kitchen with Mrs. Chun and two other women, laughing at something. Her face was open and bright in a way I had not seen before. A warm, heavy feeling settled in my chest. Not the emptiness I knew so well. Something better. Later, as the night wound down, we stepped onto the Morales back deck for some air. The yard was lit by strings of warm lights. The air was cold, but it felt good after the heat of so many people inside. "Thank you," Haley said quietly. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. "For the tamales?" I asked. She rolled her eyes. "For not letting me talk myself out of coming." "You did the hard part," I said. "I just walked in with you." She looked over the yard. Kids were playing in the last patches of snow. The older neighbors sat in plastic chairs, talking in low voices. "I feel strange," she said. "In a bad way?" I asked. "In a good way," she said slowly, "like maybe I'm not watching from the outside anymore." I watched her face while she watched everyone else. She looked content and beautiful and like she belonged. I wanted to take her hand. The thought surprised me with its strength. My fingers twitched at my side, but I stayed still. "Haley," I said. She turned her head toward me. When our eyes met, the noise of the party faded for a second. My heart picked up speed. "This past month," I said, "I've really liked getting to know you." Her lips parted a little. She stepped half a step closer. Our shoulders almost touched. "I've liked it too," she said quietly. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. For a second, the whole world narrowed to the small space between us. I could feel her breath. I could see the snowflake caught in her hair. Then her phone rang. She flinched and stepped back, pulling her coat tighter. She checked the screen and winced. "It's my boss," she said. "He never calls this late unless it's important." "Go," I said, forcing my voice to stay light. "I'll save you a tamale." She gave me a small, apologetic smile and stepped away to answer the call. I watched her from a distance as she paced the side yard. Her face went from curious to serious to something I couldn't read. When she came back 10 minutes later, the worry lines between her eyebrows were back. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe not. He wants me in the office first thing Monday. Big project, big changes." He wouldn't say more on the phone. A cold feeling spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. "What kind of changes?" I asked. "He didn't say," she repeated. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. But he sounded excited and a little too happy for a Friday night. The rest of the party passed in a blur. We talked with neighbors, helped clean up, carried folding chairs. On the surface, everything looked normal. Underneath, something had shifted. Monday morning, I watched from my window as Haley left for her downtown office in a neat black coat and heels. She looked like the version of herself I hadn't seen in a while. The one who moved like she was heading into a fight. I tried to work, but every email and line of code looked the same. At noon, I sent her a quick text. "Everything okay?" An hour passed before she replied. "Can we talk tonight?" Those 4 words sat on my screen like a stone. Of course, I wrote back. When she came over that evening, she looked tired and wired at the same time. She dropped onto my couch without taking off her coat. "Well?" I asked gently, sitting across from her. She blew out a breath. "They offered me the lead on a new multi-city project," she said. "It's huge. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. High profile, the kind of thing that could change my whole career." I forced myself to nod. "That sounds big." "It is," she said. "They want me to oversee design for 3 new buildings. In person. First in Austin, then Seattle, then maybe New York. It would mean traveling at least 3 weeks a month for the next year, maybe more." There it was, the old life, knocking again. "What did you say?" I asked. "I told them I needed time to think," she said. "They want my answer by Friday." She looked up at me then, eyes full of conflict. "This is everything I used to want," she said. "Recognition, important clients, work that gets my name in magazines." "And now?" I asked. And now, when my boss was telling me about it, all I could think was that I just started to feel like this place is home, she said. That I like knowing my neighbors, and having breakfast in my own kitchen, and not spending my life in airports. Her voice broke a little on the last word. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face, but I also don't want to be the person who turned down something huge because she was afraid, she added. "Maybe it's not about fear," I said. "Maybe it's about choosing what actually fits." She rubbed her forehead. "You make it sound simple," she said. "It's not simple," I said, "but it is a choice. And either way, it should be your choice, not your boss's, not your ex's, not mine." Her eyes flicked up to mine at that last part. "You matter in this," she said. "You're part of what makes this decision hard." My chest tightened. "I don't want to be the reason you say no to something," I said honestly. "What if you're part of the reason I say yes to staying?" she asked quietly. We sat with that for a moment. The air felt thick with all the things we were not saying. "I need to figure out who I am without my job telling me," she said, "but I also don't want to lose myself by shrinking." I don't think you're shrinking, I said. You're expanding in a different direction. She smiled weakly. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. You and your plant metaphors. Hey, it works, I said. Roots, branches, all that. She took a deep breath and stood up. I have to work through this, she said. I need to know that if I stay, it's because I chose it, not because I'm scared of change or because I'm attached to my neighbor. The way she said attached made my heart jump. I get that, I said. If you need space, I'll give it to you. Just know I'm here. She nodded, eyes shining a little. You're almost too understanding, she said. It's annoying. I'll work on being more unreasonable, I said. She laughed, but it came out shaky. When she was gone, the house felt emptier than it had in a long time. Over the next few days, everything felt off balance. Our usual morning coffees slowed, then stopped. Haley worked late. I saw her car leave early and come back when the sky was already dark. Lights in her home office stayed on long past midnight. I caught glimpses of her through the fence, hair pulled up tight. Phone pressed to her ear. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. Notebook full of sketches spread across her table. She looked like a person trying to hold 10 different things at once. My sister Rachel called midweek. So, she said, how's life in your quiet little neighborhood? Any new plant friends? Actually, I said, there's a human. Rachel perked up. Oh? I told her about Haley, about the fence conversations. The lasagna, the job offer. Do you like her? She asked. Yes, I said before I could stop myself. A lot. Does she know that? Rachel asked. I think so, I said. Maybe. I don't know. Things got weird after her boss dangled the big job in front of her. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Let me guess, she said. You decided to be noble and not say what you actually feel, so you don't. Pressure her? I stared at the wall. Maybe, I said. She sighed. Michael, she said, you're allowed to have a want in this. You don't get to decide for her, but you also don't have to erase yourself so she can choose freely. Tell her the truth. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. Let her factor that into her decision like an adult. What if she chooses the job anyway? I asked. Then at least you'll know you were honest, Rachel said. Hiding how you feel doesn't protect you. It just hurts alone. She was right, and I hated that she was right. Friday afternoon, Haley's car pulled into her driveway earlier than usual. The sun was just starting to slide down, throwing long shadows across the snow patches that were left. I didn't wait for her to come over. I walked to the fence, heart pounding hard enough I could feel it in my throat. Haley, I called. Her back door opened slowly. She stepped out, hugging her arms around herself even though she didn't have a coat on. Hey, she said softly. Do you have a minute? I asked. I need to say something before you tell me your answer. She hesitated, then nodded. Come around, she said. Inside her living room, the coffee table was covered in papers and drawings. Her laptop sat open. An email paused on the screen. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. She closed it with a flick of her hand, like she was shoving the choice out of sight for a moment. What's up? She asked. Her voice tried to be casual and failed. I took a breath. When I moved here, I said, I thought I wanted to be alone. I thought if I kept my life small, I couldn't get hurt. Then you moved in. She watched me, eyes wide and focused. I didn't plan on caring this much, I continued. About whether you had a good day, about whether you came outside in the morning, about whether you feel like you belong here. My hands shook a little. I curled them into fists at my sides. I know you're trying to decide between two versions of your life, I said. One where you travel and chase big projects and one where you build something here. I can't choose for you. I won't. But I need you to know that if you stay, I don't just want to be your neighbor who helps with roots and broken lights. Her eyes got shinier. Her breath hitched. What do you want to be? She asked. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I want to be the person you build this with, I said. I'm in love with you, Haley, not just with coffee over the fence, with the way you care about spaces, the way you listen, the way you show up for people even when you're scared. I forced myself to keep going. "If you take the job and travel, I'll be sad, but I'll understand," I said. "You've worked hard to get where you are. I won't ask you to shrink for me. But if you stay, I want it to be because you choose this life and maybe me as part of it. Not by accident. On purpose." The room went very quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the heater and my own pulse in my ears. Haley's hands were shaking. She pressed them together, like she needed them to hold still. "Say something," I added when the silence started to feel like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She laughed once, a choked sound. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I wasn't prepared for you to just put your heart on the coffee table like that." "It doesn't fit in a drawer," I said. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. My voice came out softer than I expected. Her eyes filled with tears. "When I got the offer," she said, "my first thought was, I can't leave. I just started to feel like I have a life here. My second thought was, what if I'm being foolish? My third was you." She took a step closer. "You have become part of the picture I see when I think about home," she said. "And that is the scariest and best thing that has happened to me in years." My chest tightened in a way that was both painful and good. "So," I asked, "what does that mean?" She let out a breath that shook a little. "It means I already gave them my answer," she said, "before I came over here." My heart stopped and then started again, too fast. "And?" I asked. She looked up at me, eyes bright, standing close enough that I could see every tiny freckle on her skin. "I told them," she began, and then she fell quiet, staring at me like she was about to jump off a cliff and was still deciding if she trusted the landing. "I told them no," she said. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. For a second I thought I heard her wrong. "No," I repeated. She nodded. I turned down the multi-city project. I told them I was willing to take on more responsibility, but not at the cost of the life I just started building. My knees felt weak with relief and shock. "What did they say?" I asked. "They tried to talk me into it," she said. "My boss said this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I said so as having a life that feels like mine. They said I was making an emotional decision. I said they were finally seeing that I am a human being, not a machine." There was a hint of pride in her voice that made me want to cheer. "And then," she went on, "I pitched something else, a local program. Smaller projects in this area, more remote consultations, fewer flights, more community work." I showed them numbers, the same way I did when I was trying to convince myself I had to leave. Only this time I used those numbers to prove I could stay. "And?" I asked again. "They are giving me 6 months," she said. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. 6 months to prove the model works. If I bring in enough clients and the numbers look good, they will make it permanent. If not, I may be out of a job. She said that last part without flinching, but I heard the fear under it. "That is a lot of pressure," I said. "I know," she said. "But for the first time, it feels like the right kind of pressure. Not the kind that squeezes me into a shape that does not fit. The kind that pushes me to build something that actually matches who I am now." She took another step closer. We were only inches apart now. "And when I was sitting in that office making that choice," she added, "I realized something." "What?" I asked. "That I was scared," she said. "But not of losing the job. I was scared of losing this." She lifted a hand and placed it flat over my chest. My heart hammered against her palm. "This," she said, eyes locked on mine. "Morning coffee, stupid snowball fights, neighbors who know my name. You, standing on my porch with soup when I forget to eat." I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. "You, hearing the ugliest thing I felt and choosing to step closer instead of backing away." Her voice shook. I could not walk away from that and still be myself. My breath came out unsteady. "So what now?" I asked quietly. "Now," she said, "I try to make this work. I fight for this life like I used to fight for promotions. And I stop pretending that you are just my neighbor." My heart kicked hard. "What am I then?" I asked. Her mouth curved into a small, nervous smile. "You are the man I am in love with," she said. "The one I did not expect. The one I almost missed because I was so busy protecting myself from being hurt again. Everything inside me felt like it was cracking open in the best way. I reached up and gently brushed a piece of hair away from her face. "Say it again," I whispered. "I am in love with you," Haley said. "With the way you show up without making a big speech about it. With the way you talk to your plants and neighbors. With the way you saw me at my lowest and did not look away." I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I did not wait any longer. I leaned in and kissed her. It was soft at first, careful, like we were figuring out a language we had both forgotten. Her hands slid up my chest to my shoulders. My hands framed her face. The world outside her windows disappeared. There was only the warmth of her mouth and the way she leaned into me, like she had been holding herself back for a very long time and finally decided to stop. When we pulled apart, our foreheads rested together. We were both breathing harder than before. "I wanted to do that at the Morales party," I admitted. She laughed, the sound full and bright. "I know," she said. "I wanted you to. But if you had, I don't think I would have been ready then. I am now." We spent the rest of that evening sitting on her couch, not talking about big decisions or future fear. We talked about what we wanted for dinner. We argued about the best pizza toppings. We watched a silly movie and made fun of the dialogue. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. Every small, ordinary thing felt important because we were doing it together without pretending. Over the next few months, life shifted again, but in a different way than before. Haley threw herself into the new work model. She met with local business owners and community groups, offering design help they could actually afford. She turned the abandoned lot at the end of our street into a small community space with raised garden beds and benches. She worked late sometimes, but now her light stayed on because she was excited, not because she was trapped. When stress started to creep back in, she did not disappear behind a wall. She knocked on my door and said things like, "My brain is spinning. Can we sit outside and look at nothing for a while?" We would drink tea on my back steps while the sky turned dark, letting the quiet settle around us in a way that felt safe, not empty. Our routines changed too. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. Morning coffee at the fence turned into morning coffee at one of our kitchen tables, depending on whose house was cleaner. My plant corner doubled when she brought over a half-dead fern and declared it our joint project. Movie nights became a regular thing, complete with fake rules about who was in charge of snacks. The neighborhood noticed, of course. Mrs. Morales would wink at us when we walked down the street together. The kids would shout our names like we were a set. One afternoon, as we helped Mrs. Chun carry groceries inside, she patted both our hands. "I knew from that first party," she said. "You two looked at each other like people who had been lonely for a very long time and just realized they did not have to be anymore." Haley's hand found mine and squeezed. 6 months after she turned down the big project, Haley's trial period ended. On the day of her final review, she left the house in her favorite navy blazer, carrying a portfolio full of numbers and photos. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I watched her drive away with a knot in my stomach that felt like a mix of pride and fear. She texted me around noon. "On my way home. Meet me at the fence?" My heart did a strange little flip at the word fence. It felt right that the place where everything started would be where we got this news. I stepped outside just as her car pulled in. She walked into her backyard and we met in our usual spot, boards between us, hands resting on the top edge. "Well?" I asked. She bit her lip, and for a split second, I thought it had gone badly. "They made it permanent," she said, and then the words tumbled out. "They loved the numbers. The local clients are happy. My boss said he had never seen me this engaged in my work. They want me to lead the new community design division. From here." Relief and joy hit me so hard I laughed. "Haley, that is amazing," I said. "You did it." She shook her head. "We did it," she said. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. If you had not pushed me to stop hiding, if this neighborhood had not embraced me, I would have taken the easy path and run. Instead, I stayed. and fought for something that fit. That is because of you too. I reached over the fence and took her hand. You were always this person, I said. I just showed up while you remembered. She squeezed my fingers, her eyes bright. Come over, she said suddenly. I want to show you something. I walked around to her yard. She met me halfway and pulled a folded paper from her pocket. This is my next project, she said, handing it to me. It was a rough sketch of our 2 yards with the fence removed, replaced by a shared garden space. A small sitting area in the middle, plants lining the sides. You want to tear the fence down? I asked. Not all of it, she said. Just the part between us. We can keep boundaries with everyone else. But this line right here, the one that kept us separate, I think it has served its purpose. I looked at the sketch. Then at her. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. Something tightened in my throat. You sure? I asked. I am, she said. I do not want a life separated into neat boxes anymore. Work here, feelings there, me on this side, you on that side. I want one life, messy and whole and shared. My chest felt too full. Then let's tear it down, I said. We picked a weekend. Mr. Rodriguez brought his toolbox. The kids from down the street asked if they could help. In a few hours, the old boards between our yards were gone. We stood there in the open space, sawdust in the air, sunlight where there used to be shadows. It felt symbolic and obvious and exactly right. That night, we sat together on the new bench in the middle of our now shared space. The sun was setting, painting the sky in pink and gold. The houses around us glowed with porch lights. Do you ever think about that first night? Haley asked quietly. All the time, I said. You, on your patio. Me, about to go inside. That one sentence. She smiled, a little embarrassed and a little grateful. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. I meant every word, she said. I really did wish someone loved me like that. I just did not know what that could look like. What does it look like now? I asked. She turned toward me, studying my face like it was something she was designing with care. It looks like this, she said, a neighbor who became a friend. A friend who became the person I want to tell everything to. Someone who sees me when I am strong and when I am a mess and does not flinch either way. Someone who hears me when I say I am lonely and instead of walking away steps closer. Her hand slid into mine. I love you, she said again, like it was the easiest thing. I squeezed her fingers, feeling the weight and lightness of all the moments that brought us here. I love you too, I said. And I heard you that night, Haley. I am going to keep hearing you. Every wish, every fear, every quiet thing you say when you think no one is listening. We sat there as the sky went dark and the stars slowly appeared. I heard my neighbor say she was lonely before I ever really saw her face. 2 people who had once thought it was safer to live behind walls, now sharing an open yard and an open life. The Morales music drifted faintly down the street. Somewhere, a dog barked. A porch door closed. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary neighborhood. Except this did not feel ordinary to me. It felt like the answer to a wish I did not even know I had been making. All because on one lonely Friday night, a woman whispered her loneliness into the cold air, and her neighbor chose not to pretend he did not hear. I heard her. I stepped closer. And neither of us expected that would be the moment everything finally started.